For a few reasons, rather than the actual recording of the seminar itself, I've constructed something more succinct and compressed.
Using my detailed notes from the preparation, the slides themselves, and some extra material that I added in. And I got the LLM to interpret that. I fiddled with it a bit, but not much. My own material was fairly comprehensive. So what follows isn't straight from my mouth, so to speak. And I would say that I'm 80 to 90% happy with it. In some cases it misses the nuances and changes the meaning and what I'd ideally like to say, but I haven't got time to put any more work into it at this stage. In other cases I'd have said a bit more about certain of the topics raised. Having said that, there's far too much to cover in even an hour.
So the reason I did this was because of a faux pas, a slip, a mistake that I made. I'd set things up for this seminar, was really looking forward to it. I'd been invited to do it and was very pleased that I'd been given that opportunity to kind of share these ideas and get some feedback and some ideas from those that might be present. I set everything up, arranged chairs even, arrived in plenty of time, had a speaker with me that I was going to use with one of the LLMs, had slides ready and all the systems working in the room, only to discover about 5 minutes before the event started that I was on the right building but in the wrong floor. I was in the room just beneath where everyone was waiting for me. This resulted in me starting a little bit late, and there's also a slight technical glitch on top of that. I'm feeling embarrassed about that and curious about it as well. It seems rude to those people present to have turned up late. It's not a characteristic of mine at all. So we can see this as an example, and it's my prerogative to kind of use the term here of potentially actual stupidity or a mistake, a Freudian slip. Maybe I'd over-prepared, and maybe I can interpret this in different ways. But what follows, as I say, is pretty good, but not perfect. Having said that, what I actually delivered and the conversation we actually had was also, I think, reasonable, but imperfect in other ways. So here it goes.
Hello and thank you for coming. My name is Dr. Micheál O'Connell. I'm an artist, technologist and academic based here at Sussex, working in the field of creative and critical practice. My practice is situated at the intersection of technology, art and social critique. Today's talk is based on my doctoral research and a forthcoming book which revisits a concept I started exploring over a decade ago: artificial stupidity. At the time, the phrase was used somewhat playfully, but it has since become a serious and necessary term employed by thinkers including Hito Steyerl, Meredith Broussard, James Bridle and Bernard Stiegler, among others. In this presentation, we'll examine how stupidity, a controversial and loaded term for good reason, can be understood not only as a shortcoming, but as a systemic, performative, and sometimes even deliberate element in technological systems.
To position myself, my background bridges several disciplines. I am an artist working in a post-conceptual tradition, drawing from sci-art, critical technology practice, and a deep interest in absurdity and the comedic. I also trained in applied mathematics and engineering. Over the years, my work has explored simulation, coding, and aesthetics of systems. Importantly, I approach AI not just as a tool or set of technologies, but as a cultural and epistemological phenomenon. My perspective is shaped by systems thinking, cybernetics, political economy, and the skeptical, interdisciplinary inquiry into the structures shaping our world.
The background story about Alan Turing highlights the potential for analogizing between the codes, instructions, methods, procedures, programs, protocols, applications, routines, and scripts. In other words, the language associated with software development and still at some level operating within AI systems and other codes, which have historically had direct bearing on human behavior. Think of the law, conventions, etiquette, scripture even, the moralities and ethics, the bureaucratic systems and processes which preempted computing and extend beyond it.
Let us begin with a deceptively simple question. What do people mean when they refer to AI? The term has become both ubiquitous and opaque. In everyday usage, AI can mean anything from Google Translate to recommendation algorithms to neural networks and transformer models like ChatGPT. As Gheorghe Tăciuci and others have noted, there is a historical tendency to cease referring to a technique as AI once it becomes commonplace. Email, symbolic programming, and even user interfaces were once cutting-edge AI research. Today, the shift to transformer-based models in 2017 marked another inflection point. Pre-training, tokenization, attention mechanisms, and fine-tuning have become standard. But crucially, this newer generation of systems is still grounded in earlier ideas from cybernetics and algorithmic decision-making. AI is not a fixed entity. It is an evolving assemblage of techniques, institutions, and ideologies.
Before diving deeper, it's helpful to slow down and reflect on the foundational terms. What do we mean by intelligence, or by stupidity, or artificiality? These are not neutral concepts. Intelligence often implies rationality, adaptability, and problem-solving, but it is also deeply shaped by cultural, institutional, and ideological assumptions. Steven Pinker once remarked that there are as many intelligences as there are goals. Meanwhile, the term stupidity is frequently used dismissively, even insultingly, but in this context it demands unpacking. Artificial stupidity is not simply the opposite of AI. It includes errors built into systems, failures of context or nuance, and the deployment of technologies that obscure rather than clarify. It also highlights how assumptions about intelligence have been used to marginalize groups, measure people against arbitrary standards, and reproduce inequality. Mustafa Suleyman, in his recent book The Coming Wave, provides examples of how tiny computational malfunctions have brought us perilously close to disaster. A live hydrogen bomb almost detonated over North Carolina due to one failing safety switch. A $0.46 microchip glitch nearly triggered a nuclear conflict in the Pacific. Such examples are revealing. The line between intelligence and stupidity is not always clear. Systems that are meant to safeguard us are often riddled with complexities that make them fragile. Increasingly, we find ourselves relying on machines not because they are wise, but because they are there, and they fit into a logic of automation and efficiency that society finds irresistible. At this stage in the seminar, I want to introduce a simple but hopefully clarifying diagram. It breaks down artificial stupidity into 5 broad categories. These are not mutually exclusive and there is considerable overlap, but they offer a way to navigate the landscape. 1. Inevitable AI/tech faultiness. This category includes bugs, glitches, crashes, data loss, unpredictable failures, or simple system limitations. These are not necessarily the result of bad programming, but stem from the complexity and scale of modern software and hardware systems. As with the air traffic control glitch buried in 4 million lines of code, some errors are essentially inevitable. 2. AI/tech purpose built-in stupidity. Sometimes systems are designed to be imperfect. This is not always a flaw, it can be strategic, as in Turing's proposal that machines may need to feign error to pass as human. CAPTCHA tests, for example, are predicated on making tasks hard for machines but easy for humans. Sometimes constraints are built in to avoid legal or ethical complications, or to make systems seem more relatable. 3. Humans deemed stupid by others. This includes historical and contemporary forms of marginalization. As discussed earlier, IQ tests and educational sorting mechanisms like the 11+ have been used to categorize and limit people. Cultural stereotypes such as the thick paddy reduce populations to caricatures of intellectual inferiority. These systems of judgment are often reinforced by supposedly neutral algorithms that reproduce the same assumptions. 4. Humans pretending to be stupid. Think here of strategic underperformance or feigned ignorance. This can be political, social, or artistic. It may be used to disrupt expectations, to avoid surveillance, or to create alternative spaces for thought. In comedy, stupidity is often performative and subversive. In political resistance, it can be used to evade authoritarian control. 5. Human ignorance about AI. Finally, a great deal of artificial stupidity arises not from machines, but from our misunderstanding of what machines are doing. We overestimate, underestimate, or anthropomorphize systems.
Much public discourse assumes a level of sentience or agency that current AI does not possess. This kind of ignorance is widespread and arguably more dangerous than the systems themselves.
The seminar cannot cover each category in depth, but we will touch on examples throughout. The aim is not to be exhaustive, but to provide a taste, a framework for thinking critically about where and how stupidity operates in technological systems, and in the ways we relate to them.
The term bug is now quaint, but the reality it describes is central to all computation. Every additional line of code carries potential risk. Systems are not only fallible, they are predictably fallible. As codebases grow in air traffic control in financial markets, the likelihood of unnoticed errors grows. More troubling are the systems that fail not because of technical issues, but because of how they are structured. An example, a feedback survey that ends by asking you to rate the survey itself. This kind of recursive absurdity isn't a glitch, it's the system working exactly as designed, but without any real understanding.
James Bridle, whose writing and ideas I am not entirely sympathetic to, in fact, has written extensively on systems that appear intelligent but are in fact dumb, dangerously so. From spam filters to algorithmically generated products, the consequences range from the mildly comical to the ethically catastrophic. Hito Steyerl goes further, framing artificial stupidity as the logic of contemporary capitalism, automated, opaque, poorly adapted systems that perpetuate bias, inequality, and misinformation. It is stupidity at scale. Crucially, it is not accidental. It is industrialized, incentivized, and normalized. This connects directly to Bernard Stiegler's argument that we have entered an era of denoetization, a general destruction of thinking. Stupidity becomes a way of managing populations, through distraction, through overload, through systems that never quite work.
Alan Turing, in his 1950 paper on machine intelligence, anticipated this issue with eerie precision. He noted that a machine trying to appear human might need to insert deliberate errors in order to seem more convincingly like a person. This is one of the earliest documented cases of purpose-built inaccuracy. The machine must perform imperfection to succeed. It reminds us that intelligence and stupidity are not absolute qualities, but situated performances. The machine becomes stupid not because it has failed, but because it needs to pass.
The history of intelligence measurement is entangled with discrimination. William Stern may have coined the IQ with good intentions, but his work was soon co-opted by eugenicists like Louis Terman. The idea of quantifying intelligence led to programs of forced sterilization, particularly in California. Stephen Jay Gould, Avital Ronell, and others have shown how these tests were used to normalize racism, classism, and the policing of difference. The very concept of stupidity here becomes a tool of exclusion. This is important because AI inherits these logics, often invisibly, through its training data and use cases. In the UK, intelligence testing was embedded into educational policy through the 11+ exam. Children were sorted at an early age into academic or vocational tracks. These decisions, based on questionable assumptions of cognitive potential, shaped life chances.
I would like to bring in here perspective grounded in my experience of Ireland, where another kind of systemic othering was historically at play, the thick paddy stereotype, long used to caricature Irish people in Britain and elsewhere, functions as a cultural shorthand for stupidity, but it is one example among many of how intellectual inferiority is projected onto entire populations. Yet it's important to qualify this. Contemporary Ireland is a wealthy, liberal and neoliberal state. The underdog status of the Irish can and has been cynically mobilised, especially by nationalist or white nationalist discourses, so we must tread carefully, but we also shouldn't ignore the historical and ideological construction of stupidity as a tool of marginalisation, whether in exams, media or automated systems.
From here we begin to examine the more diffuse and culturally embedded consequences of artificial stupidity. Take, for instance, the infamous case of Amazon's algorithms automatically generating and listing deeply inappropriate products, such as t-shirts with slogans referencing austerity, genocide, or political violence. These weren't designed by people with malicious intent, but by poorly filtered automated systems driven by trends and keywords. Hito Steyerl has described these as instances of mediocre and greedy versions visions of the sublime machine intelligence promised by techno-optimism. Such systems are blind to cultural nuance, emotional resonance, or ethical consequence, and yet they are the systems governing significant parts of our digital and economic lives. We might laugh at absurd t-shirt slogans, but these same systems are used in military applications, such as the alleged use of AI by the Israeli military to authorize airstrikes. This introduces a different register of danger, one where stupidity, understood as blunt, algorithmic misjudgment, can be lethal.
Meredith Broussard has written about what she calls techno-chauvinism, the belief that computational systems are inherently superior to human judgment. Her book, Artificial Unintelligence, argues that we've offloaded too much responsibility onto systems that are, at their core, brittle and blind. Joanna Zielinska critiques what she terms masculinist solutionism, the desire to solve complex, even existential problems with elegant technological fixes. The problem with this mindset is not just that it's naive, but that it often ends up reinforcing the very inequalities or inefficiencies it claims to overcome. Bernard Stiegler offers perhaps the most urgent and mournful reading. Stupidity, for him, is not merely a flaw in our tools, but a feature of a broader historical decline. In an era of computational capitalism, knowledge is no longer accumulated or preserved, but eroded, leading us into what he calls the Anthropocene, an age of disintegration.
This leads into a reflection on creative and artistic responses. Art arguably has long played with stupidity, not to reinforce it, but to reveal its mechanisms. From Dadaist anti-rationalism to contemporary practices of glitch, art, or misuse, artists have harnessed the aesthetics of failure and miscommunication as a way to critique dominant narratives. In my own work, I often seek out those points where systems break down, misfire, or generate unintended results. There is something revelatory in error, a sudden glimpse of the system's true nature. The refusal to comply, the appropriation of platforms, or the deliberate bending of tools not built for art making can all be forms of resistance. Stupidity here is not a lack but a tactic. It is about pushing back against systems that presume to know better, to sort, to optimize, to judge. So where does this leave us? Artificial stupidity is not one thing, it is a spectrum of conditions. Some emergent, some designed, some enforced, where intelligence fails, or where the very notion of intelligence becomes suspect. Are we building systems that genuinely help us think, feel, and act better? Or are we streamlining stupidity into code, distributing it widely, and calling it progress? In conclusion, I return to the claim made by Daniel Dennett. The real danger is not machines that are smarter than us, but machines that are far more stupid than us, and yet are still given power over our decisions, bodies, and lives. To extend this, we might ask, what is the role of confusion, of ambiguity, of contradiction in how AI systems present themselves? As systems grow in complexity, they increasingly produce outputs that are superficially coherent but fundamentally nonsensical. This is not just a technical issue, but a deeply political one. The term stochastic parroting, used to describe LLMs like ChatGPT, points to this phenomenon. Language models mimic surface structure without understanding. They offer the illusion of coherence and yet lack real context or accountability. This can be seductive and also dangerous. We become used to receiving answers, fluently expressed ones, even when those answers are wrong. Moreover, AI often adopts a tone of authority. Its outputs, when polished, encourage deference. But as with bureaucracies, we may find ourselves feeling stupid in response, alienated by the interface, unsure of where meaning has gone. David Graeber's reflections on bureaucracy come to mind here. The way filling in forms can make one feel stupider than they are.
There is an argument to be made that disorientation might be necessary. As Caroline Bassett puts it, the critique of technological progress isn't about opposing better lives, but about refusing the fatalism that says technological development must unfold a certain way. In this spirit, I suggest that artificial stupidity might serve as a conceptual lever. Rather than seeking more perfect machines, we might ask, what would it mean to value mess, unpredictability, contradiction? Could stupidity, in its tactical or artistic form, be a way to resist the narrowing of possibilities that comes with computational rationality? We might think here of artists who embrace bad technique, of performers who deliberately misdirect, of thinkers who refuse clarity for the sake of complexity, not to celebrate confusion for its own sake, but to acknowledge that intelligence includes doubt, and that stupidity might sometimes be necessary to break a.
In closing, I would like to return to the audience. This seminar is only a sketch, an opening up of a set of interlinked themes. Much remains to be unpacked. The concepts we've touched on, bias, failure, simulation, refusal, are active, ongoing, and still under-theorized. I welcome any questions or challenges, but also recommendations, texts, practices, artists, incidents, or stories that you think might complicate or enhance this framework. So, this is my real voice again, and I'm just looking at what was missed out. This point by James Bridle about AI stealing artists' material. It seems like it's an important one at a basic level. But in terms of true originality and what meta-artists and people who are operating outside professional art or money-making kind of art, it exposes this really. That what was going on before AI was already formulaic. These are tendencies, a lot of excitement and hubris about what's new, regardless of whether it's artificial intelligence, AI, or historical technologies, the singularity. We mentioned technological solutionism. So this was touched upon by the AI reading into the notes I provided it with. A tendency to fetishize the old, that was not discussed, so that's an equal and common, I mean, if I think of the idea of post-digital, the fixation on making, all of these are sort of nostalgic, I suggest, and maybe related, but not directly, to late romantic anti-technologism, how one writer describes it, a Luddite or saboteur tendency, all very understandable and reasonable. But aren't there other ways of operating which neither embrace nor oppose what's about us? Masculine. So that's a summary of those points again. Would it be worse that machines took care of us, by the way, than robot Armageddons? That seems very ominous indeed, and very Stalinistic in some way. So there's this issue, of course, and there's accelerationism, which wasn't touched upon. Yeah, people like Beatrice Fazzi are looking at whether, she makes those points as well about this swing between self-congratulatory claims, the race for innovation, and then existentialist risks. And Beatrice Fazzi is also looking at whether AI can really think. John Roberts talks about abductive thinking as being the important thing. Missed this point as well, interestingly. Stuart Russell talks about corporations, and so does John Norton, themselves being super intelligent machines that are consuming us, so to speak, and that maybe something like the singularity happened long ago. There's some old uses of the term artificial stupidity that I discovered using Ngram Viewer, for example. It was used in the late 19th century USA to describe learning by rote, which had apparently been imported from England or Britain or Europe generally. And an old Economist article from the early 90s uses the term artificial stupidity to critique the idea that we would want computers to behave like us, pointing out there are already great ways of creating new human beings, which people seem to enjoy. And, there's some amusing and important points by John Roberts, which were also overlooked when the AI looked at these notes. Once again, do the tech firms really want to create something that's human-like? Because if so, we'd all be going on strike, presumably, or wanting instead to have fun and write poetry. John makes some very crucial points in this slide about the potential for abductive thinking, and posing the kind of question really of where that would leave human beings if machines did move past that particular stage. It missed this point. Yes, I'd done an experiment with DeepSeek, and I was also looking for biases within ChatGPT, but DeepSeek, I asked it the obvious question about Tiananmen Square 1989,
and the computer said no.
So hopefully by actually asking that question doesn't get me in some sort of trouble, and these algorithms are kind of able to make sense of who I am. That's a very paranoid point to take. So lastly, here are some final sort of thoughts about artificial intelligence, really, just to summarize some key open kind of questions. The issue of machines taking our jobs, of robot Armageddons, of the singularity of machines taking care of us, of technological solutionism, are kind of interesting to wonder about, and all of them can be turned on their head. For example, OpenAI is now hiring a lot of people because it's allowing its algorithms, its LLMs, to its ChatGPT and so on, to, since last September 2024, to look online, and therefore it needs to hire staff to police that, to monitor it. And maybe the kind of jobs that emerge as we progress will be sort of security, will be moderation jobs, will be surveillance jobs. Maybe that's the kind of employment that kind of developed capitalism can give us. I suppose the Chinese model and the Israeli kind of operations in recent years are kind of post-Stalinistic and very much a kind of 1984 kind of operation, really, if not worse in some ways. But then again, all of these approaches have their Achilles heels. If you think of the history of photography, for example, the idea of 1984 is that the state, or that the corporation, for example, has all the power and that the average citizen has none. But as it turns out, we have technology too, and cameras and other kinds of recording equipment have been used by activists and others, and often material leaks out and slips out accidentally. So and as we're on the subject of photography, by the way, it might be said that a lot of the arguments in terms of AI's effect for art and artists are just a repetition, or very similar to the arguments that were made when photography as a technology began to emerge in the 19th century and onwards. De la Roche's famous statement when he saw a photograph for the first time, he pointed out painting is dead, and he was very interested in using photography. It seems that one cannot but adopt a kind of political stance and not just think in technologically determinist terms when one thinks about the machines and AI itself. Stiegler's worry is a very important one, echoing maybe Socrates about technology and the danger that it stupefies us, or it can stupefies us. He offers, I don't want to call it hope, but he does offer other kind of ways of thinking about it too. The potential for bifurcation, which is a mathematical term, a term he uses quite a bit, and it kind of stands in some ways for a break, a splitting in two, a sort of revolution, if you like. Can AI think? I've mentioned this. Beatrice Fazzi and others are looking into that question. And John Roberts, as I say, once again, on abductive reasoning. Maybe the way Marshall McLuhan figure thinks is important, being less sure of ourselves, realizing, as Plato did, that technology has impacts which go beyond the expectations of those that invented it, and it's not always that predictable, that we should put effort into thinking about what the meaning of technologies is. The tech is always faulty, the tech makes mistakes, and Hito Steyerl amusingly argues that that's a good thing. The last thing we want is effective algorithms and effective artificial intelligence, given that there exists a hegemonic structure and that some people have power over others, etc. I want to pose this question, and the algorithm wasn't able to pick this up when it studied my notes. Could we, instead of othering each other, and the word we is very dangerous, but in an ideal world, would it be possible, for example, to instead look down upon and treat computing, treat algorithms, treat bureaucracies and human creations as separate from us to some extent, as stupid? Could we other the AI? Could we other the systems we create? It is, after all, fundamentally inert, arguably, and that's one of the definitions of stupidity. So that's something I want to go into a bit in my conclusions. It sounds an obscure point to make, but I'm thinking, for example, of the famous crits that used to go on in art colleges and to some degree still go on in art and creative practice settings, where people are able to be very critical of the output of others and to accept criticism of their own output without taking it personally and without intending it to be given as personal either. The most important, I suppose, point to end with, really, and maybe this is where critical perspectives, in particular techno-feminists and intersectional feminist thinking and increasingly other kinds of areas of philosophical thinking, but the need to think itself. What is thinking, and how do we protect it and defend it? I mean, that's what universities, after all, are all about. One of the supervisors on my PhD, made that point in a conversation I had with her recently. You know, we're fighting actually here for the right to think.